We're conditioned to believe that if someone pulls away, we need to do more. Reach out first, explain harder, remind them of what they're losing, that love is maintained by effort, by urgency, by emotional pursuit. But in truth, the more you chase connection and desperation, the more it slips away. Emotional proximity isn't built by noise, it's built by resonance, by the quiet gravity of self-worth. Here's the contradiction. Trying to make someone miss you often has the opposite effect. It makes them feel pursued, not moved. The paradox, the very moment you stop chasing, performing, or over-delivering, you become unforgettable. Because what people miss most isn't pressure, it's presence that no longer needs their validation. The internal conflict for many sounds like, if I stop showing up, will they forget me? Or will they finally realize what I gave? But maybe the deeper, wiser question is this. Who are you when you're no longer afraid to be absent? Emotional chasing creates static. Silence, used with dignity, creates clarity. It's the difference between being overlooked in the noise and being longed for in the quiet, because we don't miss the people who flattered us. We miss the ones who nourished us and then disappeared with grace. To be missed deeply, you must first belong fully to yourself. When someone pulls away from us, the first instinct many people have, especially in attachment-sensitive relationships, is to lean in harder. You send another message. You explain what they misunderstood. You remind them of the good times. You try to re-engage, hoping they'll feel the loss of your absence before it's too late. But here's the deeper psychological truth. The more you emotionally chase, the more you teach them that they don't need to turn towards you, because you'll always be there filling in the gap. Let's explore this through Gottman's research frameworks. First, emotional flooding. When conflict or distance arises, both partners often become overwhelmed, flooded with physiological and emotional stress. One may shut down, the other may pursue. But the key misunderstanding here is that pursuit doesn't soothe the emotional flooding, it escalates it. When someone is flooded, they can't hear your words, they only feel pressure. They don't miss you, they retreat further. This leads to our first aha moment. You don't become magnetic by explaining harder. You become magnetic by regulating deeper. That brings us to self-soothing and regulation. If your nervous system is dysregulated, you transmit that signal through tone, urgency, body language, or even silence laced with anxiety. But when you learn to regulate breathing, intentionally pausing before reacting, creating emotional space, you shift the dynamic. Instead of being perceived as overwhelming, you're felt as grounded. That's when your absence begins to register, not as a threat, but as a contrast to what's missing. Let's look at a real behavior, insight, healing loop. Behavior, you send a long message explaining your side after an argument, hoping to fix the disconnect. Insight, using explanation to manage anxiety, not connection. Healing, you pause. You write the message, but don't send it. You breathe. You return to your body. You choose silence, not as a weapon, but as a mirror. You let them feel your absence, and you let yourself feel your presence. That's when the shift begins. Next, let's revisit bids for connection, one of the core Gottman insights. Every time you reach out, a text, a glance, a gesture, it's a bid. When your bids are consistently ignored or met with defensiveness, it's deeply painful. But when you keep bidding towards someone who's checked out, you slowly erode your own sense of value. Here's a second aha moment. Sometimes the most powerful bid is the one you stop making. When you choose silence instead of pleading, When you choose stillness instead of spiraling, you create a vacuum. And psychologically, vacuum breeds curiosity. That's when they begin to notice, to miss, to wonder. Let's now explore love maps. Love maps are the internal understanding we build of our partner's world. Their likes, stresses, memories, dreams. But when a relationship becomes unbalanced, when one partner stops updating the map while the other clings harder, the emotional terrain becomes distorted. You become the keeper of their world while abandoning your own. The quiet reframe? Rebuild your own love map. Instead of memorizing his mood swings, start tracking your joy. Instead of mapping his silence, listen for your voice. That's where your dignity lives, not in his attention, but in your own awareness. And finally, the four horsemen. When you chronically over-adapt in a relationship, you'll often feel criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and even contempt, sometimes from them and eventually toward yourself. You begin to resent the one you're trying to win back, and that is the internal fracture that leads to burnout. Here's a reframe of a toxic pattern. Why doesn't he miss me become, why do I keep choosing to shrink for love? That question doesn't just create clarity, it creates power. Because in the end, what makes someone miss you badly isn't noise. It's the felt contrast between who you were when you overperformed and who you are now when you no longer perform. They miss the version of you that finally came home to herself. And that's when you win. Not because they return, but because you do. Not the kind of tired from staying up all night crying, though there had been plenty of that. This was the kind of tired that lived deep in her bones, the kind that comes from amplifying in a relationship that had already stopped breathing. For months, she had been the one to reach out. She sent the thinking of you texts, the hope you're okay, check-ins, the long messages with too many words and not enough reciprocation. She justified his silences with her empathy, told herself he was busy, overwhelmed, not like other men. She even started learning his favorite football team so she could drop in references, anything to feel connected. But connection didn't come. What did come were breadcrumb responses, delayed replies, a double tap on her message without any follow-through, and then nothing. It was a Tuesday when she realized she was the only one in the conversation. Her phone had been silent for 3 days. Her last message still sat undelivered, unanswered. She stared at it for a moment. Then she did something she had never done before. She didn't send the follow-up text she had drafted, the one that said, "Are we okay?" She didn't call. She didn't open his Instagram. Instead, she put the phone face down and breathed. It wasn't a big breath. It was soft, hesitant, but it was hers. In the quiet, something surprising came through. Not grief, not panic, but a whisper-like voice from somewhere deep inside. You don't have to earn being chosen. That moment unraveled her, not in the way heartbreak unravels you, but in the way truth does, gently, finally. She realized something, a mirror truth she had never let herself see. She wasn't too much, she was just unprotected. All the chasing, the explaining, the hoping, it wasn't love. It was her nervous system begging for regulation. And she had confused his inconsistency for depth. That night, she deleted the last message draft from her notes app, the one she had edited and rewritten 5 times. Not out of bitterness, but out of mercy for herself. She no longer needed to be misunderstood to feel seen. She didn't need him to miss her to feel real. The next morning, she sat with her coffee, legs folded under her, sunlight brushing her shoulders. No makeup, no performance, just a quiet presence in her own life again. She hadn't gotten him back, but she had gotten something far more powerful. She got herself back. And that's when he started watching her stories again, when the "Hey stranger" text finally came. But by then she was no longer starving for crumbs. She had learned the difference between being missed and being worthy. The day she stopped chasing was the day she was finally seen, but by then she didn't need to be. If your heart is aching to be missed, to be remembered, to finally feel significant again in someone's emotional world, I want you to know that it doesn't start with them. It starts with how you treat the spaces inside you that were once filled with chasing. Making them miss you isn't about control or games. It's about presence, yours. And from a clinical standpoint, emotional dignity is one of the most magnetic forces we have. Let's walk through a few emotionally intelligent tools grounded in Gottman's research that restore your power silently but unmistakably. First, the 60-second pause before reacting. In moments of emotional flooding, when your nervous system is overwhelmed and the impulse to reach out, explain, or seek reassurance takes over, just pause. Emotional flooding causes the body to go into fight or flight. Your heart rate increases and you lose access to rational thought. Gottman's research shows that once your heart rate passes 100 BPM in conflict, no productive communication happens. So instead of reacting, pause. Just 60 seconds. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. This simple ritual, practiced consistently, retrains your nervous system to self-soothe rather than seek rescue. Over time, you'll feel less like a hostage to your emotions and more like the keeper of your own calm. Try this tonight. Write down a situation from the past week that made you feel emotionally hijacked. Then, journal what part of me was trying to be seen or soothed. This practice isn't about judgment. It's about creating space between stimulus and response, which is where your freedom lives. Second, name it to tame it. This is a sacred act of emotional regulation. When you feel a wave of sadness, shame, or urgency to reconnect with someone who is not meeting you where you are, pause and name the feeling. Literally say it to yourself, this is loneliness, or this is abandonment, fear. Labeling emotions lights up the prefrontal cortex and reduces amygdala reactivity. In other words, it turns the volume down on the panic and brings you back to your wiser self. The more you name it, the more you tame it. And suddenly, your silence isn't suppression, it's self-leadership. Third, the 3-1 internal repair method. For every emotional trigger, offer yourself 3 self-magications. For example, if someone ghosted you or turned cold, instead of spiraling into self-blame, practice this. It makes sense that I feel disappointed. I showed up with sincerity. My capacity to love deeply is not a weakness. Someone's inability to see me does not make me invisible. This 3-1 ratio reflects Gottman's research on emotional repair in relationships. Couples who maintain a healthy balance of positive to negative interactions, even in conflict, are far more likely to stay together. But the same rule applies to your internal relationship with yourself. Emotional resilience comes from repairing inwardly before seeking repair outwardly. Finally, a sacred ritual. Create an emotional love map for yourself. In romantic relationships, love maps are how we stay connected, the inner world knowledge of our partner's dreams, fears, and daily life. But how often do we map our own? Each week, take 15 minutes, light a candle, sit in quiet, and ask, what am I learning about myself this season? What am I grieving? What am I craving? When you build intimacy with yourself, your emotional energy becomes magnetic, not needy. That's when people begin to feel your absence because it's no longer charged with fear. It's lined with quiet certainty. And that's when they miss you, not because you disappeared in pain, but because you returned to your own center. The truth is, you don't need to prove your worth through presence. You show it through the power of your peace. You might be listening right now from a very tired place. Not just tired in your body, but tired in the way your heart keeps trying to explain itself. Tired from replaying messages, from trying to say the right thing so they'll hear you, miss you, remember the version of you that gave so much and asked for so little in return. You're not alone in that fatigue. I've seen it across thousands of conversations, therapy sessions, even research labs. It's what happens when someone gives from an empty place, hoping it will earn love instead of reflect it. And when they don't respond, or worse, when they move on to someone else, you begin to question your own reflection. You think, was I not enough? Was I too much? Here's what I want you to hear clearly and without hesitation. What if you weren't too much, just unprotected? That's a mirror truth. It's one that stings a little at first, like salt in a wound, but it's also one that starts a real healing. Because being too much isn't the problem. Loving deeply isn't the problem. The problem is when that love is unguarded, unreciprocated, and poured into people who only know how to take from a well they never plan to refill. When a person doesn't see your worth, it isn't always malicious. Sometimes it's a reflection of their emotional bandwidth. But the more you overaction, the more you chase, the more invisible you become. Not because you're not valuable, but because urgency hides clarity. It muddies your presence. And nothing about your worth should be blurred. Let me offer you a breakthrough, not just in behavior, but in identity. Silence, when done with self-respect, is not punishment, it's preservation. Detachment is not cold. It's clean. Space isn't a tactic to get them to miss you. It's a homecoming to remember you. Here's your goosebump moment, and maybe your permission slip. There is someone somewhere who would marvel at your emotional availability, or wouldn't need to be convinced, chased, or tested to stay. But that person can only find you when you stop shrinking, performing, or waiting by the emotional door of someone who already walked through it with someone else. So if you're wondering how to make them miss you, the truth is they might, but that's not your job anymore. Your job is to stand still long enough to see that you were never asking to be chosen. You were asking to feel safe being yourself. That's what's underneath all the over-explaining, all the text you typed and deleted, the silence you filled just to avoid feeling invisible. But invisibility ends the moment you see yourself again. So here's the transformation you carry forward. I will not perform to be loved. I will not beg to be seen. I will not chase someone who has not looked back. I will return to me, and in doing so, I will become unforgettable. Not because I disappeared, but because I finally showed up where it mattered most. We began with a contradiction, the belief that the more you do, the more they'll miss you, that love must be chased, explained, or proven to stay alive. But the truth is quieter than that. It lives in the space you create, not the noise you make. And now, perhaps for the first time in a long time, you're learning that silence doesn't mean absence. It means alignment. You don't need to bend yourself out of shape to be remembered. You don't have to prove your worth to be missed. Because love that's real doesn't need convincing. It only needs clarity. And sometimes clarity arrives when you stop performing and start returning. So let me ask you again, who are you when you stop performing? Maybe now you know. You're not the woman who waits for breadcrumbs. You're not the woman who loses herself to be held. You are the woman who no longer confuses attention with affection or longing with love. And most importantly, you are the woman who no longer fears being missed because she's no longer missing herself. You don't become unforgettable by chasing love. You become unforgettable by coming home to your own